Hello everyone, welcome to our Maths webinar. I'm Martin, and you can find me at ICT Magic on Twitter. I'm part of the UKEdChat team. If you're interested in what we do, then head over to UKEdChat.com. But enough about me. First of all, a little bit of housekeeping. So if you would like to ask some questions to the experts we have here, then you can do so by going to Mathvember. So that's math without the S, Vember, as in November. On Twitter or Facebook, and we'll get back to you about those questions. We're going to have some question and answer at the end. If you're attending live on the webinar, then you should see at the side of your screen there is a chat area, so ask your questions there, and again, we'll get back to you or answer your questions at the end of the chat. And also, if you'd like to comment on the archive video, again, we'll try our best to get back and answer all of those questions as best we can. But for the next half an hour or so, I have the joy of sitting back and relaxing and listening to some fantastic ideas about primary school maths teaching. The webinar is entitled Making Maths Magical, and I've seen what's coming up, and it is indeed magical. So as a primary school teacher myself, I'm really interested to see what's going to happen. So over to you guys.
All right, well, thank you, Martin. Maths is very much in our blood at Whizz, so we're very excited to take up this challenge of helping you bring the magic of maths to your classroom. My name is Junaid. I'm the Director of Education at Whizz, and I've always been interested in how we learn and interact with maths. And my work at Whizz has given me the opportunity to interact with students all across the world. And over the past few years, I've realised a couple of things about children when it comes to mathematics. The first is that every child is unique. Every child has their own individual needs, their preferences, their beliefs. And so as educators, we need to create a learning experience that is every bit as rich and diverse as our students. And the second thing I've realized is that maths can be hit and miss with students, but with the right problems presented in the right way, it is absolutely possible to excite all students with mathematics. And that's what we hope to do today, to showcase the magic of maths and to give you some tips for bringing that to your classroom. So I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by my colleague Fiona. Fiona brings over 20 years of teaching experience right from the classroom, and she's going to talk us through our maths problem today. Now, I tasked Fiona with coming up with a problem based on a few criteria. So this criteria is our way of identifying a good maths problem. So we think a good maths problem should be playful. It should have elements of surprise. It should be at the right level of challenge for all of your students. It should be hands-on and physical. And it should lend itself to a shared experience, so it should be collaborative. Not necessarily straightforward to find an activity that ticks all of those boxes. So no pressure, Fiona. Over to you.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm going to show you a magic trick. Okay, it's quite subtle, but it really shows how maths can be really magical. So, if we can go to the full screen, that's great, thank you. Right, the game's called Sum to 15, okay, and we don't need many resources, all we need are some number cards. So I've got number cards here from 1 to 9, so I'm going to place them on the table in front of us. And the idea of the game is that we take it in turns to pick up a card, and it's the first one to actually get 3 cards that sum to 15.
Any 3 cards?
Any 3 cards.
Right.
Okay? Do you want to play?
Yeah, it seems straightforward enough, so we need to make 15.
We do.
Okay.
So, I'm going to start.
Sure.
Okay, and I'm going to pick up an 8.
Okay. And I think I'll take the 7.
Okay. I'm going to go for a 4.
And I think I'll take the 6.
Okay, and I'm going to pick up the 3. Now, I have...
Gina, I was so focused on my own cards there, Fiona. I wasn't even paying attention to what you were doing. So I guess that's my first lesson learned for this particular game.
Totally, and actually, to begin with, that's what students will actually do. And you might find that some students find this type of game quite difficult because actually it is reliant on us being able to do mental addition quite quickly and actually knowing our number facts as well. And for some, they might find that tricky. So actually, we can take some of that trickiness away from them by actually using a different resource. So we can still play the same game, but use a different resource. However, we need to select that resource carefully because counters or multi-link that we've got here are actually quite difficult because we'd still have to actually count the individual parts, which doesn't really help. But we could use a resource with a distinct structure. It could be something like Mnemicon, or actually, I've got some dot cards. So shall we use some dot cards and play that? Now, these are dots have been arranged in a particular way. Arrange these out.
So these do look quite familiar. If you've ever rolled a dice, that you can kind of tell is a 5 without having to count the individual dots. Is that the main idea here?
It is. It's a skill that we really need our students to actually learn. It's called supertising. And what they're doing is recognising an arrangement of dots. So without having to count the dots, they know the value because they recognise that arrangement. So really key. But if we use something like this, it really helps them for students to see the value without having to count the dots, but they're not reliant on the abstract numbers that we just used. Okay, so should we play a game?
Can I go first this time?
You can.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to go for a 5.
Okay, and I'm going to go for an 8 again.
Okay, and I shall go for the 6.
Okay, now I notice that you've got a 5 and a 6. And if we're thinking about 15, I've got to take the 4 because I need to block you.
Okay. Well, I notice that you have an 8 and a 4. I guess that makes 12. I can't get to 15 myself because you blocked me, but I can block you back by taking the 3.
Right, okay. And now I notice that actually, now that you've taken that 3, I'm going to have to take 7.
Right. I can see why you've done that, so I've got the 3 and the 5.
Absolutely.
Okay. Right. I'm not sure you can get to 15, so I'm not too concerned there. I'm going to take the 9.
Okay. And once again, I'm going to have to block you. So I'm going to take the 1.
Feels like you've got a counter move for everything I do. So I'm left with the 2, and that's a shame actually because I can't quite make 15, I don't think. But then again, neither can you. So is that a draw?
It is a draw, it is. And actually, what you'll find when students actually play this game, their strategy is actually to win, to try and find that sum to 15. Once they've played it a few times, it's worth actually asking them a few prompting questions for them to start formulating some kind of strategy. So it might be about, well, which number do you think is best to start with? Or should you go first or should you go second? Or actually making sure they know what some of those winning combinations are, because then they're going to be able to...
And I guess you have to justify every strategy that you use, so it really brings in those elements of reasoning, rather than just trusting to luck that you're going to win each time.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't think I have a master strategy just yet, but should we carry on playing?
Okay.
I think it's your turn to go first.
Okay. Right. So... Do you know, I'm going to start with a different number this time. I'm going to start with a 4.
Okay. And I'm going to go for the 9. Just wondering if going for a large number might help.
Okay. And I'm going to go for an 8.
Okay, well, I have learnt my lesson from earlier, so now I know that I need to take the 3 to stop you from making 15.
Okay, and I'm going to take 6.
Okay, well, in that case, I'll take... Oh, there. See, I was going to take the 5 because you have a 4 and a 6. That makes 10, so I need to take the 5. But I've just seen that you've also got a 6 and an 8, which makes 14.
Got to make a decision.
Yeah, so I'd like to take the 1 as well. I can't take both, so I guess I'm done for. I'll take the 5.
Okay, so I'll take the 1.
And you win. Well,
I win.
Well done. I mean, I have to say that was very nifty. The way you came up with 2 different paths to 15.
Absolutely. And I just want you to think now, because we've talked through a few strategies that we've been using to try and win the game. So I want you to think about what are those strategies that we've just been using.
There is an air of familiarity to them, because this whole game is about grouping together objects, 3 objects at a time. The first lesson I learnt the hard way was to pay attention to what your opponent is doing. And it feels like blocking is a very important dynamic here. And then what you did at the end there with when you made 2 paths to 15 and tracked me, it all reminds me a bit of noughts and crosses, or tic-tac-toe as it's sometimes called. Am I onto something there, or is this just a great coincidence?
Absolutely right. It's a really good question to ask. What does it remind you of? Because you are absolutely right. Sum to 15 is actually noughts and crosses in disguise.
But what's the link there, Fiona? Because on the surface, this looks nothing like noughts and crosses. Noughts and crosses doesn't have numbers or addition.
No, but it's those 3 numbers that actually form that straight line.
So how can we visualize this connection?
Well, let's get all of these number cards. What I want you to do now for me is I want you to arrange them into a grid.
Okay, any
3 by 3 grid, so it's like the noughts and crosses.
Sure.
Okay, but what you must make sure is all the rows, columns, and diagonals actually sum to.
Right, because we're playing some 15. Okay, I'll try to do that.
Now, whilst you're setting this challenge for your students, before they actually start, it might be a good idea to actually get them to write down the winning combinations, because by doing that, they're going to see that some of the numbers that we have here are going to be used more often than others. So that will then help them think about where they could actually place them in the grid, because the ones that are used more frequently are going to go maybe in a place where you're going to have more of those lines going through. So,
yes, I'm just trying a few different possibilities. I'm looking at that number in the center, and some of the numbers seem too large, in even of combinations. Some of them seem too small for the same reason. And so I'm just wondering, it's been a long time since I've worked. They're called magic squares, aren't they?
It is a magic square.
And it's been such a long time since I've played with a magic square. But there's something that's telling me that maybe the 5 is a good candidate to go in the middle, because it's halfway between 1 and 9, and so it probably has the most. It's probably involved in the most combinations to 15.
It's a good starting point.
So I'm just going to take that as given for the moment. Now I'm going to think about the 9, which is the highest of all cards, and I'm thinking about putting it in the corner.
So this is where it's a good time, if your students have made that list, they can then actually have a look to see how frequently the number 9 appears, because actually, Junaid, you've placed it in the corner there. How many combinations do you need to make 9?
Well, I have 2 combinations. I've got the 9, the 5 and the 1, that's great. I've got the 9, the 4 and the 2. But I need another one to fill this row here, and it seems like the numbers that are left over are just too big. So I don't think 9 belongs in the corner. Maybe we need to tuck it in. Right. So that it would only have 2 combinations?
Absolutely, that's correct.
Okay, so I guess if I've got a 9 and a 5, then I'd better put a 1 over here.
If you look at the 5 in the centre of this particular magic square, because you've got the 9 and the 1 either side, what are you making?
Oh, I guess these are our number bonds to 10. Now, I think I can fill this row because it's the only other 2 numbers that will go with the 9, so that's another 15. And so we're talking about number bonds. The 2 is going to be paired up with the 8. So they add up to 10, and along with the 5, that's 15. The 4 will pair up with the 6. And I guess I'm left with the 7 and the 3. I think it needs to be the other way around. Okay. Do you know what, Fiona? I think I've got a magic square.
You have got a magic square. So all of your rows and all of your columns and your diagonals.
Now, I'm guessing it's not always going to be so fluent with students. We kind of fast-tracked that, didn't we?
We did. And actually, it could be quite a lot of trial and improvement in trying to work out where these numbers go. But we're actually going to show you some magic with how this actually works. So, but shall we have a look at magic squares?
Yeah. I'm just thinking back to noughts and crosses and exactly how our original game, Sum to 15, links to noughts and crosses, because playing Sum to 15 is a matter of finding 3 numbers that add to 15. And now that we've got it in this grid format, that's like making a straight line.
Absolutely. So yeah, your 3 numbers that add to 15 is your straight line with the noughts and crosses, which is, as I said, in disguise.
So that does feel magical, because we've got 2 games that on the surface look very different, but we've transformed one into the other using magic squares, and actually we've shown that they're equivalent games. So I never would have seen that coming. Yeah. But the magic squares are magical in their own right, aren't they?
They are, yeah, and I really hope that your students see this, because I find it quite fascinating that actually what we've got here is all these rows, columns and diagonals that all add up to the same number, which I think is absolutely fascinating in itself. So yes, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, that's not something we should take for granted. There's no kind of natural law that tells us that a magic square should be possible. So I know that this has been a thing that's fascinated people for thousands of years. And there's an interesting story involving magic squares, isn't there?
Actually, because we're going to take a brief look at some magic squares now, because actually you're totally right, it does go back a long way in history, and actually I'm going to go to China.
Right, okay.
Because actually this is supposed to be one of the earliest stories where magic squares came about. So I'm going to read you all the story, and students absolutely love stories, so it's a really nice way of actually getting that wow factor in actually going back in history but actually telling the story as well. So it's just really interesting. So the story is about the legend of Lo Shu. Now, Lo Shu, there's a story about this huge flood that destroyed all of the crops and the land. And people then used to offer sacrifices to what they called the river god, because this river used to flood quite frequently.
Right.
And by offering a sacrifice, they were hoping that this would really calm the actual flood down, or actually the waters would recede. But interestingly, every time the river flooded, a turtle would come out of the water. An actual turtle would come out of the water and actually walk around the sacrifice. Okay, so one day a very observant child actually noticed on the shell of the turtle there was a very distinct pattern. And when they looked, the pattern consisted of lots of circular dots. So
we're back to the dot cards, or something similar,
We are. So if you look very carefully, actually what they noticed was that the rows, so if we look at the 4, the 9 and the 2 on the turtle's shell there, actually is the same as the magic square.
But it doesn't, it's not obvious to me that there's a square in that turtle. Where's the square?
If you look,
it's more like a circle.
Okay, if you look on the side of the shell, you see a 4, a 9 and a 2, then underneath you've got a 3,
so we've actually got 3 rows of 3 rows.
Yeah. And they realised that actually all of these rows and columns actually sum to 15.
So that was perhaps the first ever occurrence of a magic square.
Yeah, and actually the story goes, what they actually did is they actually then left 15 sacrifices because it was summed to 15.
And did it work?
Well, it kept the world happy, and apparently the waters didn't flood again, but
some slightly spurious historical things. But actually, this is what I love about maths, because all of these concepts come from somewhere, and more often than not, there's a fascinating historical context that underpins these ideas.
Absolutely, and I think what's also really interesting is there's more magic.
There's more to come.
There's more to come, because if you get your students to do exactly what we've just done, and you give them the numbers 1 to 9 to complete a magic square like we've done here, what you'll find is the order in which they place the numbers into the grid might be slightly different.
I was wondering if this is the only way to make a magic square.
Right.
And what other ways there might be.
Yeah, well, there are 6. I'm going to give you the answers now. There are 6 possibilities, but it's really good idea with your students to get them to take the magic square and actually compare their magic square with others in the class to see what the differences are, because actually then you can start to see how the symmetry actually works, and you can see on the screen here the 6 different possibilities.
Now we're in the realm of geometry, and this is a great entry point to reflection and rotation and other concepts in symmetry. So just thinking about the magic square that I made so proudly, this is the original one, and what this is telling me is that if I perform various transformations, then through the symmetry I'll still have a magic square. So for example, if I take the reflection through the horizontal row, I guess the lower layer will come to the top, and the top one will go to the bottom, and apparently I still have a magic square.
You do.
Certainly seem to.
Yeah.
And it would also work with some rotation.
As well, absolutely. But when we actually have a look at these 6 magic squares that we have on the screen, what do you notice that they've all got in common?
I have been wondering about that number in the middle, because when I was doing it really by trial and error, I was intuiting that it should be a 5, and now we've found 6 different magic squares with a 5 in the centre. I'm wondering if there are any other possibilities with a different number in the centre.
That's a really interesting question, and actually you can ask students to try and explore that to see if there are any more possibilities. But actually, there aren't. But it's a really good one for them to reason why there aren't, to actually try it out.
Yes, that's my homework.
It is your homework. It is. Now, I don't want you to think that actually this is the only way to do a magic square, just by having digits or the numbers 1 to 9 to place them into a 3 by 3 grid. We can actually use lots of different numbers. So actually for some of your students, we're going to go to another slide. For some of our students, actually it might be a good idea to give them some different number cards. So here, for those who are maybe trying to understand how magic squares actually work, if we reduce the element of the mental calculation that's got to go on, we could just use 3 1s, 3 2s and 3 3s and place them within 12 because there's more magic.
Yeah, I'm just working out that they all add up to 6.
Right.
So that seems to be a magic square in and of itself.
Right, so if we actually look at the magic square that we've created, we actually knew what each of the rows, columns and diagonals had to add up to.
Yeah, yes, we knew it had to be 15 because of the game that we were playing.
Now, it's a really good idea to explore with your students because we could just do it by trial and improvement. However, there is a way to work out what the actual sum of each of those columns, rows and diagonals have to be. It's called the magic number. That's what
that total is called
that total. So, but there is a way of working it out before you actually complete the
How do you do that then?
Okay, so if you think about the numbers that we've got here, and what we need to do first of all is add all of these numbers up from 1 to 9.
Right, so 1 plus 2 all the way from 9.
Absolutely.
I think that's 45.
It is 45, okay. And now we need to see how we can link that to 15, because we already know that the actual sum of all of those is going to be 15. So
well, 3 15s are 45,
okay,
then if that's relevant.
What have we got in our square here?
We've got 3 rows. And so the 45 has to be split equally between the 3, so 15, 15 and 15.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so in that second grid, we've got 3 3s, 3 2s and 3 1s. I think that all adds up to 18. That's why the magic number there is 6. That's what all the columns, rows and diagonals need to add up to.
So quite fascinating, but there's slightly more magic. We're thinking now about the centre number.
Going back to that, yeah.
Okay. So,
because we said the magic number is a third of the total.
Yeah.
I'm just noticing that 5 is a third of 15, the magic number there. 2 is the centre number in the other square, and that's a third of the magic number of that square, which was 6. So it seems like we're saying that the centre number is a ninth of the total.
Absolutely.
And is that always going to be the case?
Well, that's once again what you should do with students is don't take it as a given.
Is that my question too for homework?
It's homework, because actually you need to go and get some other numbers and try and place those just to see if it actually works.
And then actually develop an argument around that. Okay.
Yeah. So how magical are magic squares?
Well, it seems like they're a bottomless pit.
Well, funny you should say that, because I've got some more ideas of things that you could actually do with magic squares. So these are all on the handout that comes out after the webinar. But you could use the concrete resources. We use dot cards. You could use dot cards, or you can actually use the Numicon. That's another good resource to actually use. And you can actually place those instead of the actual number cards into the grid. And that sometimes really helps those pupils who are just trying to understand how the combinations work. By seeing it visually, it can really help support that. We could also change the numbers. We've really been using the numbers 1 to 9, and we did have a quick look at the numbers with using 1s, 2s and 3s. But you can try exploring with lots of maybe some 2-digit numbers as well, putting those into the grid and exploring magic squares that way. We could actually change the size of the grid. So we could use a 4x4 magic square.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about what a 2x2 magic square looks like, but I've got a feeling that's not very interesting once you think about it for a while, but that's probably worth spending a few minutes on.
The 4x4,
but you're saying there's 4x4 magic
that would really challenge you. If you use the numbers 1 to 16.
So here we've actually got a 4x4
we have got one, and actually this one that you can see on the screen is a really special magic square. It's called an omen square, a magic square, because it has some very special qualities. So it's not just about the rows, the columns and the diagonals. There's some other properties.
It does feel like that grid of numbers is speaking to me. There's all kinds of patterns that seem to be there on the surface.
But I'm not going to tell you what those special properties are, because once again on our handout there's a link and you can actually see what the special properties are. But we can actually move slightly off magic squares from the point of view where everything is the same to actually looking at a prime magic square, where if you're using the numbers 1 to 9 again, this time the rows and the columns have to add up to prime numbers.
And is that possible with the numbers 1 to 9?
Do you know, I'm going to set that as more homework. Okay.
That seems really fun.
Details are on our handout. Also, we can have an un-magic square.
So what's one of those?
Now, it sounds like it could be really easy, but actually it is quite challenging. This time, all the rows, columns, and the diagonals all have to add up to a different total.
Right, so like as far away from magic square as possible.
Absolutely. And that sounds easy. I can see the one having a go now, but it's not as easy as it.
And now, of course, I'm wondering whether it's possible to have a prime unmagic square, but that's all for later.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, and what I want us to do now is to go back to the game, sum to 15.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about the different strategies, and this is a really nice way to actually do this with your students as well, get them to think about the strategies, because it's a really good question that I want to ask you now is, what's the winning strategy? Because actually we've explored,
right,
and they would have done in the classroom, explored all these strategies. What is the winning strategy?
Well, I hadn't played Sum to 15 before, so thank you for introducing me to that. I've played more noughts and crosses than I care to admit, and actually my exercise books when I was a primary student were just full of these grids. Not because the teacher sent us the work, but just because that's what we did when we got distracted. But actually, after you play for a while, you realise there's only a handful of combinations. And so if both of you know what those combinations are, and you both play the perfect strategy, every game will end in a draw. So on the one hand, this is fascinating because we've taken two games that look very different and shown that they're actually just two representations of the same game. But I feel slightly unsatisfied because there is no winning strategy for this game. So is that all there is to it, or is there anything more we can do?
Well, that is all there is to it. But actually, if you think of all that reasoning and everything else that's happened to get to that point, you think, oh, actually, that's all happened, and they've come up with those strategies. So that's a good way anyway. But we do have some more things you can do with noughts and crosses. Okay. We do have something called Dotty6. Now, Dotty6, you'll find it on the Enrich website, and that's more for our younger students. And it's really good helping support them with supertising, helping them with combining numbers together. So that's a really good activity, but it's done like noughts and crosses. I'm not going to say any more. Details, once again, are on the handout. There's also traffic lights, which takes noughts and crosses to another level. It's brilliant game to play. Involves coloured counters, but I'm not going to say any more.
Fiona, what am I looking at on this slide? Because it seems like I'm looking at a monstrous noughts and crosses, but we've got noughts and crosses within noughts and crosses. So what's all that about?
I'm not going to say.
Is that ultimate tic-tac-toe?
It is ultimate tic-tac-toe. It is a beast. And it's very addictive. Once again, details are on our handout, but it is, you won't want to play normal noughts and crosses.
I feel like I've been missing out all these years. I need to go explore.
Yeah, anyway.
But this is actually how maths evolve. So we come up with a set of rules, we investigate all of their different properties and consequences, and then we get bored because we figured everything out, so we start to bend those rules in different ways. And actually we're just seeing an example here of how you can take a simple game like noughts and crosses, and I imagine there's a whole bunch of questions to explore and the ultimate version. There are.
But another day or homework tonight.
Well, that's my evening sorted.
Anyway, I just want to think about the actual problem, why we chose it. Sum to 15 is a problem that I would call, and I'm sure you've all heard this term before, low floor, high ceiling. But we've put in wide walls as well, because actually we feel it's really important to have a problem that is accessible to all students. So actually you can see for some of our students, do you think we could just change it to the next slide so they can see?
Yep, just loading.
Okay. So you'll see on your screens in a minute the things that I'm talking about. But what's really important is that the access point involves all students. So, some just might be finding out those combinations to 15, whereas others could be taking it to the realms that we've just been talking about as we've been exploring magic squares and noughts and crosses and the strategies involved. But it's nice because there are so many different representations here. We're looking at strategies, we're finding solutions, and students can have their own ownership of these, the way in which they're going to record the things, with what they've been doing, that mathematical dialogue that's been happening. But also, I think we're not careful, sometimes we just keep giving more and more concepts for children to understand, whereas here with this activity, what we're actually doing is we're actually looking at their skills and how they're processing that and the strategies that they're actually working out. So a really nice problem, and I thought it really fits that criteria.
Yeah, I think it shows well. So I think we're having a bit of an issue with the slide, but perhaps it's not the worst thing that we have this ultimate tic-tac-toe grid staring at us. But I do think you chose well. We were going to go back to the criteria from earlier. So a good maths problem, remember, we felt should be playful and surprising, the right level of challenge and hands-on and collaborative. But the one that I really want to emphasize is the right level of challenge, because you'll know as teachers, when you have 30 students or more in a class, it can be very difficult to find a single activity that engages them all where they are. That's the real challenge of the differentiation. And what I really like about your problem, Fiona, is that it has so many subtle layers of depth to it. And if you issue the right prompts and guide students accordingly, then you can imagine that problem will lend itself to a shared experience. And I think it's important to think about the ways in which we can make maths inclusive for all students. And there you have a problem that will hopefully engage them regardless of where they are in the curriculum. So thank you very much for that. And if you could perhaps just say a word or two about how to take advantage of the physical setup of a classroom and really bring maths to life.
Absolutely, because I think, we've spoken about the right problem, but what we also need to make sure we have that whole holistic experience for our students. So to actually think about our actual learning environment as well and what we've got in our classroom. I always used to designate an area to mathematics and problem solving and really celebrate it. I used to think carefully about the resources that we had there, making sure they were clearly labelled, accessible to all students, and actually, I wanted all students to use the resources. It wasn't just for some pupils, it was about all students. And then thinking about, we used to have key words, so key mathematical words that I really wanted students to use in their dialogue with each other, so that it became rich in what they were saying. So we used to have a word of the day or a word of the week, and there was an expectation you must use that in your sentences that you're talking about when you're talking about mathematics. And then thinking about questions, I often used to have a maths question at the beginning of the lesson, not to do with the actual maths, but more about the processes and the strategies they were using. So, why does that method work for you? Or it might be, how could you represent that now in a totally different way, using a different resource? Just trying to get them to really think about those strategies as well as the actual maths. And also used to try and make things interactive, because I always had a group of students who just loved to be challenged. So like we've had Mathvember with a problem a day, used to put actually a problem a day up on the wall for them to actually take down and have a go and explore, on the playground or spare 5 minutes that they found during the day. But I think the other part that was really important to me was to have that inclusive area where actually I can do mathematics, have that positive culture going on in the classroom, and enabling all students to go and practice and explore. And yes, so that's just a few tips there, just to think about what we really want.
Well, thank you, and I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking that I wish I was in your class when I was a primary student. I'm pretty sure my exercise books wouldn't have been riddled with noughts and crosses grids, although maybe there'd be the occasional ultimate version. So thank you very much for your time. We'd love to take your questions, to hear your suggestions of what activities you use to bring the magic of maths to your classroom. Mathvember has been brought to you by Whizz Education, so we partner with schools all across the UK and throughout the world to raise standards in math through our award-winning online tutoring suite, Maths-Whizz. So please head to whizz.com if you'd like to learn more about how we work with schools, and you can also sign up for a free trial. There are 2 days left in Mathvember, so please make the most of that. You can go to the Mathvember website and download all of the resources for free. And you'll also be able to find them on the whizz.com website before long too. Please stay in touch, because from our point of view, every month should be Mathvember, right? And I think with that, we'll hand back over to Martin.
Well, first of all, thank you for such an engaging presentation. I've learned so much, and wonderful resources you have here. And thank you so much for making my life as a primary school teacher so much easier and better. Right, we have some questions from Twitter, and do keep your questions coming in, and we will get back to you as best we can. So you can do that using the chat function in the webinar if you're watching live. You can do so using the Mathvember hashtag on Twitter and Facebook, and you can also do so in the comment section if you're watching the archive section. So some questions from Twitter. The first one, quite often we can easily identify where there are issues in a particular area of maths, but how can we make a meaningful difference to children who struggle in all areas of maths?
Okay, I think first of all what's really important is to actually identify whether students are actually underachieving in mathematics or have a special need, because I think the approach will be slightly different depending on what it is. But if they're just underachieving, then it's really important to then think about how we are actually delivering mathematics to them, thinking about maybe the resources and making it as real as possible, so that you're helping support that I can do it, and they've got the visual representation there in front of them as well. I think also for a lot of students it's linked with their basic skills, so it's actually finding out where their actual gaps are and actually helping to support those particular gaps, but also thinking about number sense, because sometimes it's their lack of understanding of some of the crucial number concepts that actually stop them being able to then build on that, because actually their foundations are very weak. So
I'd also add, Martin, that I think it's important to normalise the struggle. If you look at the history of maths and mathematicians, it is invariably a story of struggle. A good maths problem will force you to struggle, to make mistakes and to fail occasionally, and we need to embrace that. What makes or breaks you as a mathematician isn't whether or not you struggle, it's how you cope with that difficulty. And I think it's a very powerful message to students that it's not only okay to study maths, but that's actually a big part of what it means to be a mathematician.
Thanks for that. So another question from Twitter: how can parents help their children? How can teachers help parents help their children with what's happening in the classroom?
Well, I guess the first thing to say is actually have Maths-Whizz, because you can actually use that at home as well. But I think what we need to think about actually is maths can be an area that causes a lot of anxiety for parents, because actually how they were taught at school is often different to how we actually teach it in the classroom now. And what we need to try and think about is how we can reduce some of that anxiety. So it can be done in a number of ways. I know it's very difficult sometimes to get parents into schools, but sometimes we can put things on our websites, school websites, where actually it might be showing you how to do some of the core operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. I've actually run the courses in the past where actually the parent and the child are coming together to learn some mathematics, or having open days. So there's a whole host of different things that we can do, but it's trying really to reduce the anxiety, because I think it stems back to their own difficulties they've had in mathematics. So,
yeah, I mean, I have very little to add to that. I know from speaking with parents that use Maths-Whizz all across the world. I mean, every parent has the same ambition for their child. Every parent aspires for their child to succeed in school, and particularly in mathematics. And often what holds them back is their own experiences and their own lack of confidence. So we're inviting students on this journey to hopefully help them develop their confidence and understanding of mathematics. And we need to include parents as part of that same conversation.
Okay, and our third question: how can we make maths homework more than just a page of sums? How can we make it more engaging and interesting?
Okay, good question. I think, once again, we need to make sure we reduce any anxieties, but I think at home with the parents, because I think sometimes when maths homework comes home, it's like, oh. But I would think, try and think creatively about the homework. So try and involve what goes on in the house, things you can do in the kitchen with regards to measuring, things you can see outside in the garden or taking a walk down the road. So it's trying to actually, as teachers, think about activities that incorporate all of those things that actually happen at home, rather than take the maths from the classroom home. Just try and make sure we involve some of the maths that's in the home as well, to make it more interesting and actually get parents more involved in, because I think it feels less threatening when it's done that way.
I think Fiona did very well there, not to mention Maths-Whizz, but that was but more generally speaking, I think having a reliable way of pitching the level of the homework to the individual needs of your students is critical, because often the learning experience is defined not so much by the content, but by your readiness, the prior knowledge that you bring into that. I think that's often one of the challenges with homework, is how do you set an assignment that is appropriate for all the students. That's just one of the things that Maths-Whizz helps with.
Okay. And obviously, SATs are not too far away. And our next question covers this one. So, as SATs approach, kids are quite often completely turned off of maths and English. So what can be done to keep up their enjoyment and their readiness to do maths in the lead up to the SATs?
Do you want to take that, or shall I?
Well, I'm sure that what you're doing here at Whizz is a fantastic resource to use.
Well, thank you, Martin. I wouldn't have thought of that. SATs are obviously, for now at least, they're a fact of life, and as long as it's an expectation of students and teachers and parents, it's something that we all need to get behind. But you would hope that it never comes at the expense of students' enjoyment and understanding of mathematics. I would remind, and I do remind students, nephews and nieces of mine that have gone through the same exams, I do remind them that mathematics is not a performance art, particularly not at age 11, and that life will continue regardless of the outcome. And if you can just lower the stakes and just assure them that there are positive reasons for having those assessments, they shouldn't necessarily tie themselves up in knots trying to get the highest possible score, then hopefully that leaves some breathing space to focus on some of the other aspects of maths that perhaps don't always come out in exams. And the other thing about exams is they're often done during the summer period. Maths should be immersive and we should engage the physical environment too. So you would hope that they're not kind of secluded in their rooms, bound to pen and paper, regardless of whether they're being done or not. So I think particularly that time of year, it's important to encourage them to go out and actually find maths out in the world. It's everywhere.
And we have actually written some tips to help support teachers and parents with in the run-up to SATs, just to try and actually reduce those anxiety levels, and also just to help them still enjoy the mathematics that's going on. So yeah.
Okay, this next question, I have to say, it does ring true to myself as a primary school teacher, and I'm probably going to get told off for this, but I found sometimes that teaching times tables can be very repetitive. It's often rote learning. So how can we improve that situation? What kind of tips can we do to improve times table learning?
If rote learning is interpreted as mindless, repetitive drilling, which it often is, and it's often applied that way, then there's the simple piece of advice that I would give: do away with it. And let me take the perspective of somebody that appeared on Countdown many years ago. I won my series about 10 years ago. And what I observed there was that the best contestants, particularly around the numbers game, they didn't learn their craft by subjecting themselves to these drills. They didn't forcefully memorize each of those facts in isolation. They knew their times tables, and actually they knew a lot more than that. But it was through their immersion with numbers. Look what we did with numbers today. We started with what looked on the surface like a very simple game, single-digit addition. And we turned it into Maths-Whizz and ended up in the realm of noughts and crosses, which is actually a logic game. That's what awaits you if you're willing to really engage the depth of the number. Times table facts are useful to have at hand. You don't want to always have to rely on a calculator, but there are far more effective ways to acquire those facts than learning them in isolation. Maths is a subject that is defined by its patterns, so we should be constantly seeking it.
Okay, thank you. Right, our very last question actually combines two different questions. So should maths be taught as a discrete subject or in a cross-curricular way? And in addition to that, how can maths be developed across the curriculum?
Okay, it's two really good questions there. I think we need to think how each school will make their own decisions about how they're actually going to teach mathematics. But I think what's important is that the children do need the basics. So there is an argument for discrete, because actually, if we're not careful, sometimes if we've got a creative curriculum and we're doing all these lovely things, which is absolutely amazing, but then sometimes we try and make the maths fit, and it doesn't always fit, and that's when it can become quite fluffy and children aren't understanding it as well. So I think it could be a mix of the two, but it's thinking very carefully between the two to make it really work. And where there are really obvious links, well, let's really celebrate it. And why try and do it in a maths lesson when I can do it in a different lesson, in a PE lesson, or I can do it in an art lesson? So, there are all those cross-curricular links that we can have, but I think they need to fit well rather than just trying to make them fit.
What I found is we saw an example of it in our activity, that there are so many overlaps between maths and history, because that's precisely how mathematics evolves. It isn't just spring up into being. And that's certainly one subject that I'd like to see more attention drawn to in the maths curriculum. The subject abounds with fascinating examples. Some of them are just legends that may or may not be true, but actually if you look at where these concepts came from and how we came to define things like number and place value, there's some rich history that is just at the fingertips.
Okay, well, thank you for all of your answers and for your wonderful ideas. Just to remind viewers to keep questions coming, we'll get back to you. But can you tell us where the viewers can get hold of the wonderful things that you're doing at Whizz?
Sure. So another reminder that if you go to Mathvember.com, you can access all the resources around Mathvember, the daily problems, and some other fantastic resources that Fiona has created. So plenty more where the magic squares came from. And if you go to Whizz.com, all of those resources will soon be available there, and you can also learn a lot more about the work that we do, partnering with schools and helping them to raise standards in learning. So Mathvember.com and Whizz.com, and you should also be able to find me on Twitter. A shameless plug, if you haven't already. So please come say hi, and I'd love to continue the conversation.
Thank you once again, and thank you very much for watching.
Thanks very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay, bye now.